This little camera was released in 1980 and takes 110 film. Despite being small in stature, it packs quite a punch and offers just about everything a 35mm camera from that era could. But is it too much camera for such a small format? Hi everyone, Azriel Knight here, and in this video, I'm talking about my first impressions of the Minolta Zoom 110 Mark II. I picked up this little wonder last year at one of my favorite thrift shops in town, and the owner actually thought it was broken. He said the shutter wouldn't fire, but as some of you know, in certain cameras, the shutter locks up when the battery dies. I put a fresh set in and it worked right away. I think I paid 15 bucks for it. I'm pretty sure I had the flash too, but I accidentally threw it out. This is the Mark II, which is a huge departure from the weird flat design of the original. The first time you pick one up, you're going to notice it has a bit of heft to it considering its size. It has an optional grip. I prefer mine on, and the controls are intuitive for anyone who's used an aperture priority camera before. Now, I'm not a huge fan of 110 film. You should have a look at my detailed review of the Pentax Auto 110 if you get a chance, but what drew me to this camera was that even though it has an integrated lens, it has many of the same features as a full 35mm SLR. Aperture and exposure compensation are easily accessible, the viewfinder displays the resulting shutter speed, and the lens has a decent focal range of 25 to 67mm, which is a 50 to 135 equivalent. Plus, a few more surprises which I'll get to. One of the great things I want to say before I go any further is that unlike APS film, which is discontinued, 110 film is alive and well through the company Lomography, which has several color and monochrome types. So if this camera interests you, know that you can get the film fresh. The other thing I should mention is that yes, you can develop this film at home, but one of the only solutions besides a DIY project where you cut a Patterson spool is this Yankee Clipper 2 tank, and the reviews are mixed at best. I did my own look at this 3 years ago, and here's what I had to say. Unfortunately, the first thing I noticed is the overall build quality is flimsy. The lid only slides into place, it doesn't lock. The reel felt thin and easily bendable. And the agitation stick didn't fit at first. I had to spend some time wearing down the plastic, and it doesn't lock to the spool on the inside. It only works by pure tension. But by far the biggest design flaw is just how long it takes to drain the tank. Since I made that video, I've maybe used the tank once. It's a hot piece of trash, and never would I use it for anything else. Lastly, you will need a special holder for your film scanner, unless you're lazy like me and you just taped it to your existing holder. Okay, by now you know it's a bit of a process to get to your final image, and you should probably have that in front of mind when you take everything else into account here, because this camera is actually really great, and most of the limitations extend from the aforementioned. If you own one or are interested in buying one, I'm going to give you my personal pros and cons as well as some tips, but first, here are my favorite photos taken with the Minolta 110 Zoom Mark II. I hope you enjoyed those. I was pleasantly surprised how well the shots turned out, as the film was expired. I could also see that the lens quality was there despite the negative size. I was really impressed. I was also disappointed that Lomo Tiger CN film was not available on 35mm as far as I could tell. I like the way it rendered the colors and am now tempted to buy some stuff fresh. The tank proved once again to be a huge pain, and 2 of my frames ended up damaged. I think it was the spool pushing the film back out while it was agitating, but I can't be certain. Okay, let's talk about some pros and cons. First, the pros. Pro number 1 is obviously exposure control. That was one of my big gripes with the Pentax Auto 110. I'd much rather have control than the ability to change lenses. The aperture dial can be adjusted in half-stop increments, and the resulting shutter speed will be displayed in the viewfinder, and that's pro number 2, the viewfinder. An optical viewfinder with a split prism focusing system and shutter speed display. If the shutter is between 2 stops, both speeds will light up with a red LED. The shutter itself is stepless, so I can't be certain it's in half-stop increments when this happens. Arrows will also show up if you're over or underexposed. On top of all that, a dioptic adjuster for your vision, and an eyepiece shutter lever to block unwanted light coming in from the back if needed. Pro number 3 is the lens. Even though it's integrated, the lens has a good range of 25 to 67 millimeters and a maximum aperture of 3.5 that remains consistent throughout the focal range. It also has a macro setting, a close-up filter slides into place from the inside. Pro number 4, a few other great features include a bulb mode, a trigger socket, and a battery check. All of this crammed into a small form factor without feeling overcrowded. Okay, and now the cons. Con number 1 is some might argue that it is too much camera for the format. A lot of work was put into this thing to make it, feature-wise, indistinguishable from an SLR. Because of that, it may set you up for disappointment when you scan your negatives. And con number 2 is the advance lever is on the bottom, and using my left hand took a little getting used to, but I get why they did it. If you're new to 110 film or are a seasoned user, I have some tips when using the Minolta. Tip number 1 is that this camera only has 2 film speed settings, 100 and 400. There's this little arm in the back here which will dictate the setting by whether or not it gets pushed back by the film's indicator tab on the right. It's really subtle. I'm guessing Lomo's 200 speed films will compensate for that. And tip number 2 is try not to focus on image quality. That is not what this camera is for. It's an itty-bitty beast, but you won't be making any 16 by 20 enlargements from these, that's for sure. And those are my tips. I really hope if you were on the fence about this camera that I helped you make a more informed decision. If you already own one, you probably know what a nifty little find this is. This, my friends, is my favorite 110 camera so far. Definitely run circles around the Pentax. This year I have committed to only owning 1 camera per format. So I'll be getting rid of that Pentax Auto 110 really quick. What is your favorite 110 camera? Let me know in the comments. And that's all for now. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, perhaps consider supporting me on Patreon. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter. And until next time, stay classic.